similar to like in religion, they say faith untested is weak. I think the same is true for the nature of ideas. I think that um, it is ideas that become stronger with opposition as well. So, for example, if you believe something to be true, and it never is contested against other ideas, you never bounce it off other people, or you never bounce it off people who feel differently, right? If you never have that conversation or the debate, then your ideas end up being weak because of the lack of exposure to the alternative, right? So your ideas are constantly living in denial of the validity of the alternative. And that's a dangerous place to be because then your ideas are never tested. And ideas that are untested are by definition weak. And that's what John Stuart Mill is coming up against, is that um, if your ideas have not faced scrutiny, then they are of lesser value than the ideas that have faced scrutiny, regardless of where they come from or who says them. Um, I feel like in my life I've seen that problem firsthand, and I think that that's a problem that a lot of we as Americans have in the political debates today. Is that we are overconfident in our ideas' ability to stand up to any scrutiny, and we're unwilling to test them against opposition, rather to hold them dear to us like a flame in the wind, constantly protecting them from adversity. And the same is true for our own personal inner felt beliefs. That's how I feel about it anyway. But he brought that quote up, and I thought that was really interesting and neat. I liked that a lot. Well, it looks like there's still no one on yet. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to use this footage and the footage from last time to make some interesting content for you guys. I really do wish now I had recorded that discussion that I had with Nate on Thursday, because we had a really interesting discussion that was topical about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that was very long, and it had to do with the morality of war and the the authenticity of moral obligation to commit violence, etc., etc. And I say that in those vague terms because I think that this conflict is one in which both sides face some deserved scrutiny in its treatment towards others. And essentially, my point was that peace is impossible as long as neither side is willing to give up what it would take to achieve it. And I think that's what perpetuates the conflict today is the inability to forgive and the inability to move on. It's created a carrot and stick motivation in the political systems of both sides that perpetuate the problem because it's like they're stuck. There's no motivation to create peace in a way because the voters demand nothing but violence and oppression. So, yeah, I was hoping to have some kind of discussion on that tonight, but if no one will have it with me, then I don't want to be a hypocrite after reading that quote from John Stuart Mill. I don't want to preach without opposition, and then my ideas will become just as weak, right? I was talking with the other teachers today. My mentor teacher said, "Oh, Mr. Adams is famous because of the Bigfoot video." And the other, he starts talking about, he was in this viral video, blah, blah, blah. And, the other teachers, their eyes went wide. And I said, don't worry. I actually went viral for something that I'm proud of. And it's not how most teachers go viral. Most people go viral during their darkest hours, their most inhuman points in their lived experience. But in a way, I'm lucky because I went viral for something that I actually feel proud of for the most part. which I think doesn't happen very often, and especially by accident. Um, yeah, it was like 4 years ago that the video was filmed, and at the time I didn't think twice about it. I didn't recognize the content creator, and so for all I knew, he could be a hobbyist with very little followers like me. So I didn't think anything of it, and I wasn't engaged very much in the social media space. So I just kind of forgot about it. Um, and then years later, it picked up and got popular, but it was just a bunch of people from high school um, that would send it to me and say, like, "Oh my gosh, this is you. This is so incredible. I can't believe that." Yeah. You're very popular and famous on TikTok, blah blah blah, and I just kind of ignored it. Um, but it went off again on Instagram mostly, and I was flipping through Instagram and I saw that reel, and so this time I thought, oh, just for the fun of it, I'll type a comment in there that says, "Oh, I'm actually the debate kid in this video," and then everyone streamed into my Instagram, sending me all kinds of DMs like, "Oh, haha, this is so funny," writing comments and stuff like that. And a lot of people sent me messages asking if I was still doing it, if I would do more debates like that, if I was still doing it. And I said, well, not really, because I don't go on campus very often anymore, but um, I thought, I could probably do something similar, but online. So I started getting interested in making a YouTube channel, figuring out how to do something similar, but online. And I had this thing where I would have them pick the side and the topic, and then I would debate the opposite. So what that forced was they didn't know how I actually felt on the subject, and they were in control in a way of what the topic was. So like if I said something that particularly offended them or made them angry, it's like, well, you kind of asked for it, right? It was the ball was always in your park. The ball was always in your hands. You kind of controlled where the conversation would go for the most part. But at the same time, that kind of opposition was there. So you end up learning a lot. Selfishly, I ended up learning a lot about other perspectives and other ways to see the issues from multiple perspectives. And I know a lot more about those discussions because I've been a part of them. And I think most people, I don't want to say most people, but a lot of people have the tendency to just get into their echo chamber online, and they only ever hear their own side confirmed. And it puts them in a weaker position because then they believe so fervently this one side of the argument or the discussion. And then they never end up hearing the other side. So they end up thinking that like the other side is just inhuman barbarians that are just dumb if they don't think the way that they themselves think. And that's really damaging because then the problem isn't that we disagree. The problem is you, right? I just get so angry at these gosh darn, insert tribe here. And that does a lot of damage, I think, to our democracy and to our public institutions, really our society in general. I think most young people today have an older family member that they essentially have lost a relationship with because of their inability to be civil in their discussions with other people. Yeah. I know that's definitely the case for me. I feel like I've lost family members to that exact kind of thing. I told my high schoolers, I gave them a challenge that the first person in any of the classes that can find the video of me and show it to me, I will give them $5. And it took them, about 3 weeks, I think. Yeah, for them to find it. And they all thought it was hilarious because I would then show it to the whole class, And they would be like, wait, that's you? I've seen that video like 5 times. Even my mentor teacher was like, I've seen that video 5 times, blah, blah, blah. Um, and I guess they just didn't recognize it because I don't have a beard in the video, I guess. Um, and so there's always like 10 kids that are like, oh, I seen that video. I can't believe that. Blah, blah. And that was really fun for me and fun for them, I think. I think on YouTube it had reached 24 million views or something like that. And on Instagram, I don't even know how to keep track of that, but I know it's definitely going to be a lame claim to fame for the rest of my life. I've never been recognized in public, though. That's never happened yet. Probably because I have a beard. It makes it harder for people to recognize me from the video. But, yeah. When I did it on campus, every once in a while I'd have people, because people would take pictures of me doing it, and then they'd share it with their friends, and then it would kind of, be locally famous. And people would say, oh, I know you from that thing that you did. I walked past you one time when you were doing it. But still, it didn't really feel like I was famous, really. I don't know. I didn't feel famous. It was just kind of like, oh, that's cool. Bigfoot's in the news again today. I know there's a trend going around now too. Is this video of Bigfoot in Colorado? I've seen the footage, and I have to say, for how blurry it is, it's the best footage that we have ever been able to find on the topic. The footage is usually just awful. This is the best footage ever. Does it still look like a dude in a monkey suit? Yes, but you know what? It's bouncing around the internet again. I remember there's an organization I used to work with called Normanar, and they kind of do research on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints culture and history and stuff like that. They did an interesting video on the idea that Bigfoot is Cain, which used to be, I guess maybe in a way it still is. I don't know how popular it is today, but this idea, this notion that Bigfoot is actually Cain. And this video, the guys at Mormonar had traced back the source of this notion. Back to when there's an apostle, I think, or maybe it was a general authority. I'd have to see the video again to make sure, but they name him and say, like, it's a story that he was riding on his horse in the woods, and the Bigfoot came up to him and said that he was Cain, and then he used the power of God to rebuke him, and then he ran away, and so that's how we know that Bigfoot is Cain, supposedly. And that kind of fan theory, I think, survives and retold in various forms over the years. Bigfoot is an interesting North American cryptid, I think, that just keeps coming around. I remember I went to a museum. I want to say this was in Yellowstone. Maybe this was in Wyoming. I don't remember. Dang it. I was very young. We went to the Bigfoot Museum. One of these like roadside attraction type things. And on the inside, they kind of like tried to take it seriously. Like, this was not just like a shack, on the side of the road. This was like someone actually tried to make it look like a museum. And they had videos of Bigfoot and the different, places where they found him. And you have these like wide-eyed people that you've never heard of that are academics they would come up to the camera and be like, oh yeah, see, in this video it's impossible for the human knee to twist and bend in that way, and so we know that this is some kind of human subspecies, and blah 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 blah, right? All this pseudoscience. And they'd have like these big the cone-shaped speakers that you would stand underneath, and then they would play like recordings of supposed recordings of Bigfoot. Like, oh, that's a squatch. You can hear it, and then it's like, as a little kid, I didn't really know what to make of it, but my parents got a kick out of it. They thought it was just funny.
Hello?
Oh yes, we
You,
gotcha. I can hear
you
you
can
now,
hear me?
man.
Alright, sweet.
Yes, I can. All right. What do you want to talk about, Jenny?
Well, I don't know. This is my first time here. I've seen a little bit of you. I've obviously seen that viral clip of you. But yeah, I just thought you were super interesting. It was interesting. I was curious about the fact that why you didn't have like a bigger platform or like, because like you have such a interesting like like take here. Like you like debating and taking like a neutral side.
Well, I think by neutral side, you mean that I have them pick the topic in the side, and then I have to debate the opposite. Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
basically, yeah, you're not like picking an actual side based on your own opinions, but um purely just to, I guess, play devil's advocate or something, which I think is super interesting because in that sense you open up like a lot more like ideas that people may have not been open to, but also at the same
Mm-hmm.
time you're not trying to. It's not like you're trying to push opinions either.
Yeah. Well, everyone hates that kid in class, right? That's like, uh, devil's advocate here, and then he says something
Yeah.
that you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's gonna say something dumb, and then I have to sit here and listen. And the professor's kind of like, yeah, that's an interesting approach, I guess, but most people hate that idea for a reason.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely like I would say the case, primarily the case. But at the same time, if we don't have, that side, where we're constantly like questioning, what's the norm or something, then like how do we progress, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
I was just talking about this with Nate on Thursday. He had this great quote from John Stuart Mill that says essentially the same thing. I'm hoping to use that quote for something promotional for this because it definitely encapsulates what I think is great. And it's the idea that if your ideas are never tested against other people, then you're doing
mhm,
what I call um, in denial of the validity of the alternative. Meaning that,
uh-huh,
like, if you have an idea, you have a belief or a side to a debate, right? Whatever it is. If all you do is keep it in a little echo chamber and you never bounce it off like other people who may see the world differently, it ends up being a pretty weak idea, right? Because it's never been compared or discussed against an alternative view. And I think
mhm,
that one of the values that I try to espouse or tried to espouse back when I was doing it, and that I still do today, I hope, is that I create a environment where things don't get heated because they don't know if they're preaching to the choir or not, right?
mhm,
Right? And they know that I might not actually feel the way that I feel, and so that kind of removes the 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 personal from the discussion, right?
mhm,
It can't get personal because they don't know how I personally feel, and so like that kind of creates an environment where you can just talk about the issue in the discussion and maybe see the counter argument from a new perspective or hear new counter arguments to your preconceived conception that you otherwise may not have ever heard. And so that's why I think I learned so much and continue to learn so much from the experience is because of that, where I force myself to see the issues from a different perspective, and I force myself to learn other arguments in a way that I wouldn't otherwise have learned. So that's why I think it's so important and radical. And to be honest, I think that if our society doesn't get better at disagreeing with each other, then there's a
Without being so
limit.
hostile either, right?
Yeah, yeah. If you can just, without getting heated and without getting personal and, turning it into some kind of hurtful or um, mean discussion, right? Where you get all these emotions wrapped up in it that have nothing to do with the issue. Um, like you get so caught up in uh, dumb stuff that doesn't really matter that much, but you get so invested in it that those
Oh yeah, as soon
emotions
as the
become
personal
real.
insults come out, the argument or the conversation is pretty much over. So
Yeah, like you be having a discussion about the budget deficit or the
mhm.
national debt of the United States, and then like it, unfortunately, right in national politics, it ends up coming to like, yeah, well, you're just a snowflake and your wife is ugly, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's got nothing to do with the national debate, but it still ends up sidetracking the whole thing. Like I was watching a funny
Hmm.
video today of this comedian that was like, it was so weird watching President Trump. This is before he was president. He was running for president at the time. Um, have these presidential debates because we'd put these like career politicians that were, as he called them, dorks, to debate him, and Trump just did not give a crap. Like this one instance where he's debating Ted Cruz, and they're talking about like the economy or something like that. And then at some point,
Hmm.
Donald Trump is just like, "Yeah, well, your wife looks like a dog," and
Oh my god. Yep.
and just like, what does that have to do with anything?
But people
But this
praised him
is.
for that kind of stuff, you
Oh
know?
yeah, and they're just like, yeah, he says it how it is. Really?
Hmm.
It doesn't contribute
So
anything.
yeah, no, it really doesn't. But I mean, that's what really fueled the people. Um, like that's literally he bullied all the Republicans out, and then like that's how I remember seeing it as.
Yeah.
So um, but
Yeah.
yeah, actually, I remember seeing something. I don't remember where. I think it said that you got like reached out by the Forward Party or something. Um, isn't that isn't that like Andrew Yang's organization or thing?
Oh. I don't know where you saw that because I don't think I said anything about that. I mean, it's kind of true, kind of.
I
So
think I did a little bit of research, but I'm not that prepared. But like I was I like I saw like from your video, I saw you, and then I saw your like YouTube channel. I watched a little bit of your first stream, and I saw like a little bit of the comment section of your like of the post of you, and then like your replies, and I think I saw like your post too. I think it was somewhere buried in there. So yeah, if that seems a little weird, I'm sorry, but I was
no.
like super interested in the whole idea of what you were doing. So that's why I was doing a lot of that digging.
Well, so I do a lot of volunteer work, writing, organizing, and advocacy for third parties.
Hmm.
So I live in the state of Utah, for example,
Okay.
and in Utah, there's a third party called the United Utah Party. That's just for
Okay.
like
Yeah, I think I saw something
within
about
the
that too.
state election, and I do a lot of work for that.
Hmm.
And then the Forward Party is a national party, a national third party,
Hmm.
and I do some work with that too. Um, and then there's another project I'm working on called the Common Sense 250 Project. And
What was
I
that?
work on that project with a man named Joe Cook. It's this idea where we're trying to figure out a way that we can change the carrot and stick um, motivation and consequence cycle of politics so that we can get better results. So, like for example, um, we live in a two-party system, right?
Hmm.
There's if you
Which
only
sucks,
had
in my opinion.
two different options in anything else, right? ideological, economic, commercial, whatever, right? You're going to get bad options because
Mm-hmm.
there's only two choices, and so they know that they can really just do whatever they want, and they're still going to get your vote because what are you going to do? You're going to vote for the other side? Oh, you'll never do that, right? So it kind of limits the accountability there. Um, and I use the analogy of like, imagine that there was only two car companies in the world, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
no competition. This is it's a monopoly, and that leads to crappy products, crappy customer service, and insider trading and corruption out the wazoo, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um, that I think is what we have in the two-party system now. And so we're working on this program that would bypass the two-party system. So you can kind of get over that hump of the argument of like, well, you can't vote third party because that's just throwing your vote away, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
better that you put your vote on the lesser of two evils than to vote for someone that you know isn't going to win. Is the
Wait,
argument.
how would that work though?
It's
Like,
really
how would?
complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I made so I do some of the web development
So it's an
and the
actual
writing.
program, like a coded program.
Well, so it's not a program; it's an organization.
Okay, okay, okay. I was
I'll
just
share it to
wanting to clear that up.
you
Mm-hmm.
after the stream if you're interested. But so I do a lot of work on that, and that takes a lot of time too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so in the realm of and then I do some local politics too. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
there's a tenants union that's coming together in Provo because rent has gone up 40 to 45% in the last 10 years in the place where I live, and that's
Mm-hmm.
caused a lot of problems there. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Student advocacy groups. I used to be more involved in campus politics at the
Mm-hmm.
university that I attend. But
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of dipped off because I don't go to campus anymore. I'm in the middle of my
Mm-hmm.
student teaching, so I spend my whole day just teaching in the classroom, and it's very rare that I go on campus anymore. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind.
So, do you know who Andrew Yang is?
I do know who Andrew Yang is. Yeah.
So he was someone I like followed like really closely a couple years ago when he was like really popular. Um, and he's not so popular anymore
Yeah, you're
because
in the Yang gang.
yeah, I was in the Yang gang. Um, yeah, and and like I live well I don't live in New York. I live really close to New York. So when he was running for mayor too in New York City, I was like really following that too. Um, and yeah, I just feel like he got like the short stick like I feel like they really did him dirty like the whole time he was trying to do anything. Like he got like very minimal media coverage. Um, what's it called? And then like whenever he did like one like they tried to like rag on him for like anything that they could possibly rag on him, and then like it worked. Like I forgot what it was, but like something about like making Asian jokes, right? And then they were trying to get the Asian community to turn against him because of that or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I really liked his ideas. I really thought he was, you know, trying to do something, and I thought he was actually like making big moves for like someone that was relatively unknown and running for president. And then I feel like, regardless of his efforts, like there's nothing he could have done just because of the system that we have.
Yeah, well, he came during a time, and I think this election cycle is going to be similar in the sense that it's going to be a great year for independent parties because
Mm-hmm.
both sides, the choices for candidates from both sides are so remarkably poor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I actually listened to a podcast. This is one of my favorite podcasts. It's called Open to Debate,
Mm-hmm.
hosted by John Donvan, and it's a debate podcast where they have it's by a organization called Intelligence Squared, and they have a resolution, right? They take debate actually seriously. This is not like the televised presidential debates where it's just a crap show. But they have a resolution, right? A topic. So, for example, the one that Andrew Yang talked about was, "Does America need a third party?" And they get people who are actually really qualified and know a lot about the subject to take whatever side. And then what they do is that they poll the audience before the debate and ask, which side do you take on this topic? And then they poll them again after. And whoever changed the most minds to their side, quote unquote, won the debate. But they're also pretty clear that they're like, look, what wins here is public discourse, right? Because now, we've had this debate and we walk away knowing more or seeing a side that we didn't consider before. So the one that he talked about was that topic was, does America need a third party? And I thought that he was particularly qualified to advocate for the necessity of a third party, because I think I agree with what you said, that he was snuffed by the two-party system. And I think he's a great example of someone who has really good ideas, great energy, intelligent, but at the same time ends up being killed by the two-party system's aristocracy, right? I remember like years ago when Pete Buttigieg was running in the Democratic caucus. I thought that I felt kind of similar, where I was like, this is a person who's moderate, smart, and really knows his stuff. He's articulate. He's way better than, I thought was easily better than half of the other candidates that were running. And then at the end of the day, you end up with Joe Biden? Really?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I wasn't the only one that thought that. I was like, for example, the average American looks at the candidates who are running for president right now and they think, oh my gosh, we really can't find anyone in this entire country who can be more articulate or sane or capable than these two. Really? And I just, oh my gosh.
I feel like for me, it confuses me. Like, how is that even possible? Like, I felt like Joe Biden was like clearly, like when it came up to like Joe Biden and Bernie, like I thought it was gonna be Bernie by a landslide. But the fact that like it was Joe Biden, does that mean like there's clearly a huge percentage of the population, and I'm guessing it's like the elderly people, right? That are like just that misinformed and are just gonna vote for who they see, like like on the front.
That's why, in my opinion, even down to the caucus's side, a lot of those determinations end up being made by the parties themselves rather than the voters.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. Like it can't. It's like in the end, like there's no way like the vote ended towards Joe Biden. Like yeah. So, and if that's the case, then that's super rigged, isn't it? And that's super messed up.
Yeah, I don't want to overuse the word rigged. I feel like that's come to mean something else in elections now. But I do think that the party bureaucracy plays a corrupting factor in this, and that I think that the parties are not motivated to make consensus a priority. Rather, it is to please a solid core of party elites, and then down the line, some kind of core base for the party, right? So in Donald Trump's case, it was all about like, you got to target the base, even if it comes at the price of alienating everyone else. Because they're gambling on this idea that like, well, what other choice do you have? It's either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. So, right, it's a race to find the most ridiculous person that can galvanize support in the minority of the population the most, and then pray that everyone else, when they pick the lesser of two evils, picks you. So there's no motivation to get the approval or the admiration of the majority of the people in the electorate. It's all about targeting the most radical wings of your party and then hoping that because it's a monopoly, the other people won't pick the other side because the other side is portrayed as that much worse. You see what I mean?
Okay, so if that's the case, then how did Donald Trump do it? Did he actually monopolize the Republican Party?
I think that he played for the base. I mean, I think this, I know this is probably cliche, but the people who were saying, early on in his candidacy, when everyone thought he was a long shot to win, you had a small minority part of the party who were the most energized, said,
Mm-hmm.
we have someone who looks and sounds like me. And they identify with that. They get super excited about it. They're like, this guy sounds like, the rant that I would have with my grandkids in an Applebee's. And so that's who I'm going to support. And we can finally see myself represented on the world stage. And then
Okay.
after that, then the party is stuck with a train that doesn't have brakes, right? Regardless of even you have some factions in the party, like Mike Pence, for example, right? Who's trying to say, you got to calm this thing down because this is going to turn into another Tea Party, right? This is going to be a migraine to the party forever, right? And he's just like, we got to try to stop this, but you can't because he's already garnered the support of the people who sit and watch Fox for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is that I think that news media, and to a lesser extent now social media, is really responsible for creating those kinds of environments in which common sense and consensus building is no longer a motivation for politics.
I mean, social media, it doesn't even try like now. I feel like social media, like whatever the algorithm, like your algorithm is, like it's just gonna keep pushing whatever your like opinions or world views are, that kind of content towards you. So, like in the end,
Yeah,
like it's like worse than Fox and like CNN or whatever. Um, yeah, because social media is now just concentrated like content of whatever you think is, you know, whatever you think is your opinions, and it's just gonna constantly push that content towards you. So,
uh-huh. And normal people don't get clicks.
mhm.
So you
Yeah,
got to say the most bombastic, ridiculous, red herring or hyperbolic generalization that you can because it's going to get both sides upset and get a lot of views, right?
oh
So
yeah,
that's
no,
why,
you gotta really. Yeah, you keep going.
that's why I get kind of annoyed when people would compare me to Louder with Crowder, if you know what that is. Have you
Yeah, yeah,
seen
yeah.
that?
No. Yeah,
Yeah, so he,
I
he
thought
has
you
like a
were him.
sign. I know, and I
Mm,
know I'm gonna be spending the rest of my life trying to make this distinction. But he has a sign
yeah,
that says some kind of outlandish topic,
yeah.
for example,
Like
um,
abortion is bad. Debate
yeah,
me or
like
something like that.
abortion is murder or
Yeah,
something like that. Prove me wrong, right?
yeah,
Or convince me I'm wrong or whatever, right? And the whole point is that you have a camera that films the discussion, and you're going to have people that are triggered, right? They're mad about, hey, I can't believe that you have
yeah,
that opinion, and they're going to come over here and rant in this unprepared way. And most of the people, at least the ones that they show anyway, are people who have never had the conversation in real life before. They're just stepping out of their echo chamber, right, to have this conversation. And then, of course,
yeah.
Crowder is motivated to just edit out all the normal topics and debates that he has, where someone's just like, well, this is why I think, and like clearly articulates their side and has a calm tone the whole time and doesn't get, personal or fall into any logical fallacies. That's not interesting. That doesn't get attention. He's going to edit those out immediately, right? But what is going to get the attention is like Crowder destroys libtard in debate
Yeah.
on UFC campus and at
What was
University of
that
State
popular one?
Tech. Yeah.
Was that popular one with the transgender student?
Yeah, and I'm sure that that's the one that takes off, right? Because
Hmm.
they're like, same is true with when Ben Shapiro visits college campuses. It's kind of the same
Hmm.
way where they have like the Q&A session, and some girl comes up and
Oh
says like,
yeah, yeah.
so this is why can it be that this went? And he's like, cause it's in the name. It's this way, and
Yeah. He tries to
and then
seem
like,
so like
yeah,
yeah.
Ben Shapiro destroys Snowflake with logic and facts, and because facts don't care about your feelings, and blah 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 blah. But it's like nobody learns anything from those debates, right? It's all it does is confirm whatever you previously believed. Like nobody watches Ben Shapiro out of curiosity for what the other side like. If they want an unbiased approach to a summation of both sides of the argument, they're not going to watch Ben Shapiro, right?
Yeah.
And everybody knows that. The only people that consistently watch Ben Shapiro are people who already think like Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing. And then they end up in this trap. And then people like Ben Shapiro, for example, are motivated to appeal to that base as tightly and as closely as possible. And so you
Yep.
end up in this winding gyre where you can't really, escape. And I think that the Republican Party has really found themselves in that ditch right now where even people in the Republican Party criticize them for saying that you don't have any policy. All you're doing is complaining about culture issues and, random stuff like that. But, like, even fiscal conservatism is not really a priority for the Republicans anymore. It's conspiracy theories about climate change and uh, COVID and vaccines and
Whether or
critical
not if
race
we
theory, right? You can't
yeah.
really translate those things into actual policy.
Policy.
like,
Yeah, exactly.
so, that's why even Republicans are kind of frustrated because outside of culture wars, they're not really sure what to talk about.
So I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like when I'm on like YouTube or something, like I'll see like a Ben Shapiro short here and there, right? And like I know these are like normally the popular clips that get viral, and like a lot of people in the comments are like saying, yeah, your Ben Shapiro's the goat or whatever. Um, and like when I do see these clips, like I tend to like agree with whatever he's saying on the clip, but like in the back of my head, like I know like I don't normally agree with everything he's saying. Like this is just a one clip that I'm seeing, right? So like I try to be self aware of that, um, but like that doesn't take away from the fact that like some of these clips that I do see, I'll still like maybe like I'll like agree with some of it or something like that. Um, and it's like hard to be specific because there's like so many random clips of Ben Shapiro. Okay, here's one clip that I remember. He was talking about he was talking about the African American community and how statistically um I forget, honestly I forget, but basically there were he was basically saying the reason why the African American community is in the situation that they're in is strictly because of themselves, right? Um, and it's a culture problem, not like a and it's not like a political or like a problem that like politicians can actively do something about, right? He's trying to say something that you guys need to do something about. And like to a sense, like I agree with it, like because and like I know it's sort of fucked up to like agree with that, saying like it's your guys' fault, but like can you really deny the numbers and the statistics like within the African American community? The violence within, you know, black on black crime is so high. The statistics of people of kids graduating high school is so low, and stuff, and that's obviously going to lead to the economic state that they're in, right? So like how can I possibly deny that, you know?
Well, are you asking me how you can deny that, or are you giving a
Yeah, so I would
characterization
want
of
to
Ben Shapiro?
so I actually would want to hear your opinion on that, like, or not your opinion, like how you would debate that actually then.
Well, so
How yeah.
one of the things that I think that kind of bugs me about Ben Shapiro is that he loves to deal in absolutes, where he has a tendency to radically oversimplify an issue and then say anything else other than this assertion of an absolute cannot be the case, right? And at the same time, that approach kind of says, it kind of throws your hands up in the air and says, well, you know, nothing can be done about this issue. But the problem is that it doesn't really solve the issue, right? So even Ben Shapiro would agree that it's an issue, right? The problem of inequality in the country is an issue. His opinion for the causation of the issue, though, is then that it's a cultural issue that cannot be addressed by, you know, reparations, for example. Okay. Or some kind of government program to give scholarships to African Americans because it doesn't solve the underlying cultural issue. And to the extent is the reason why I disagree with that is because it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really solve the problem. It's just saying, well, it is what it is. And you can't say it is what it is with an issue because it's not going to go away, right? And I know that he's famous for saying that facts don't care about your feelings, but feelings are how people vote, right?
Yeah.
People vote based on their feelings. So if they feel like there's inequality in America, that's going to translate into how they vote, right? So the issue's not going to go away just because you say nothing can be done about it. So that's why I think that that would be my first contention, is that the appeal to doing nothing is not going to make the problem go away. The second thing is that if we assume that the bulk majority of the issue is related to cultural problems, all that is saying is that what is necessary to solve the problem is what is necessary to create cultural change. And I don't think that that's an impossibility. And I think that history kind of plays this out, where it used to be the case that people would make the same exact assertions, almost word for word, about the Irish or about the Italians or the Eastern Europeans, right? There's something about them culturally that debilitates them from equality. And I think it's always tempting to say, well, you know, to do the same thing that Ben Shapiro does, where nothing can be done about it. They just are this way. And, you know, if we got to lock them all up, we got to lock them all up, right? But the other thing is, if it's only a cultural problem, then the question is what can be done about this cultural problem? And I don't think that the answer to that is nothing can be done about a cultural problem. The government, even conservatives, believe that there's a tremendous amount that can be done about cultural problems, right? I think most of what conservatives rant and rave about is what can be done about cultural problems, right? The kids these days discussions, at their root, are just cultural problems. And so, then you have to think about, oh well, what can be done to solve a cultural problem, and that requires much more than just throwing your hands in the air and saying they get what they get. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Um. So I guess you're basically saying that we just have to attack it culturally. Um.
Mm-hmm.
I just I just don't see how we could do that.
Well, so it's been a focus of various civil rights issue workers from a long time. So, like Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois saw this as a particular um, uh, issue to be addressed. So I'll tackle this with a bit of history. So Malcolm X, his parents were big supporters of W.E.B. Du Bois. And W.E.B.
Okay.
Du Bois had this perspective that if the African American community can just become self reliant, which was possible back then, right? They can buy land out in the West, settle that land, and they can live as independent, mostly self sufficient farmers in these communities. So Malcolm X's parents actually grew up in Kansas in one of these communities that was geared towards getting independence, a kind of economic self sufficiency.
Hmm.
The problem is that culture is uh, not something that develops in a vacuum, but something that is largely inherited and then adapted to new environments. And I
Yeah.
don't
So
think that many
it's
people would
gradual.
argue against that, right? It's gradual. So, like, for example, um, I think that a lot of people on the left hyperbolize this, but slavery, for example, you have this institution of slavery where you work on the land
Hmm.
that you don't own. There's no self sufficiency here, right? So you are reliant on the plantation owner for your food, your board, really everything, right? They're like slaves are not self sufficient. It's part of the system. So when they're freed, right, during Reconstruction, one of the ideas was, well, if we divide up all of the plantation aristocracy land in the South, and then we have the African Americans, the recently freed slaves, give them that land that they can own, then they're not dependent on anyone. And then they can do,
Hmm.
what they will. Um, but it didn't end up working out because uh, Abraham Lincoln got assassinated and was replaced with uh, President Johnson, who reversed that and just gave all of the slaveholders their land back without the slaves. Well, then you have the problem of like, well, I have all this land that I need labor done on without any slaves. And so then sharecropping kind of replaced that. And then,
What was sharecropping again?
so sharecropping was the people would live on the land, but they didn't own the land. And they would work on the land doing farm labor that they would then uh, give that their crop that they grew on the other person's land to the person who owned the land in exchange for like food and board and stuff
And
like that.
shelter. Okay. So
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
it's just slavery without the label.
Yeah, and at the time they had all kinds of restrictions. Like if you went into debt with the person who owned the land, it was illegal to leave. So in many ways
Hmm.
they found ways to make sure that they were in perpetual debt by manipulating the prices of the commodities that they gave to them. And you can
Hmm.
imagine that recently freed slaves aren't that good at financial management.
Yeah, and there was that whole thing of like recent, like some slaves didn't even know that they were freed, right? Like I
Yeah.
remember,
So you have
like
sharecropping for a long time, and that exists all the way. That just continues all the way into the 30s and 40s. Now, in the 40s, there was the Great Migration, right, where you have
hmm
large numbers of African Americans that are leaving the South
Uh-huh.
for really the first time in substantial numbers, and they're going to manufacturing cities
Yeah.
in the north, so like
Chicago and New
Chicago,
York.
Pennsylvania, New York, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Then, even then, they're not really independent because they work for a large corporation that pays them very little, and then they also live in still segregated neighborhoods, right? So
Yeah.
the whole like separate but equal thing still applies to them in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
Schools don't get integrated until the 70s and 80s, and by then you already have so many years and generations that have built up to create this cultural problem. And then at the end of that, by that time, the carrots and sticks and the value criterion have changed. I don't think this is unique to African Americans. I think it's something that occurs to lots of places. Like during Lyndon B. Johnson's administration, there was this big question of how is it that these Appalachian farmers in the Appalachian mountain range, right, the hillbillies of Appalachia, why is it that the poorest places in America are predominantly white, right? That just blew people's minds because they thought like, oh, well, black people are poor because they're inferior. It doesn't explain why all of these white people are poor though. So that became like a real like head spinner. How could this possibly be, right?
Well, I mean, the
um,
majority of the country is still white, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. So like for a lot of people, it affects what they value in their upbringing. So, for example, I know this is a joke and it's awful, but the joke is that if you have reparations, the stock of Nike shoes will skyrocket. The reason why that is because it's a value criteria, right? In a culture, different cultures value specific things, right? And if it's not valued, it may not be pursued. And that's the case where if you live in a culture where acquisition of education, business ownership, and stable family households is not really a possibility because of things outside of your control, the value criteria is going to be something else, right? It's going to be something that's actually acquirable and measurable. And so that's where you get into things like that. And I think the value criteria is changing a lot. So it kind of gets out of this idea that, like, what I really need is to marry a rich man. And people make fun of that. They make fun of that notion in the African American community today, when really that was the exact same value criteria among the majority of white people just 50, 60 years ago.
Mm.
It was the same thing. It's just in a
Yeah.
different decade. And so the problem, though,
So,
I think, is
mhm.
that then if you take that approach and say, like, well, black people just get what they get, right? Because
Mhm.
of the behavioral problems, that puts them into a stereotype that I think negatively causes it to perpetuate. Because then it's like, well, if I'm not black, what am I? Right? And that's why I think that stereotypes can be very dangerous and damaging to people, even if they're good ones, right? So, for example, if an Asian person is not good at math,
Yeah.
does that cause like an identity crisis? It shouldn't. But are they like, well, if I'm not good at math, am I even, who am I, right? So the value criterion, even to the self, is like, well, I got to act this way, or I got to, right? Some people in the African American community make fun of this all the time when they say, like, I have to act black, right? And
Yeah.
there's a certain kind of pressure to act black. So me, for example, I grew up in Utah for most of my life. There's pressure
Mhm.
to act Mormon, right? Because of the community that you're in. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy over time. So for example, it's totally possible for people like Ben Shapiro to say, like, yeah, it's a cultural issue. I agree that it's in part a cultural issue, but that doesn't mean that nothing can be done about it. That just means that rather than it being something that you can just throw money at and expect to go away, What that means is that it has to be much more involved and deliberate, which is the exact things that Republicans are so frightened of, which is things like a black Ariel, like, um, which I think is just ridiculous. How in one breath they'll say like these snowflakes are so fragile, right? But then they'll just lose their
Hmm.
mind if Ariel's black.
Yeah.
And I, the reason why I bring that up is because like those things that challenge those stereotypes and subconsciously give people more options for who they can be does a lot of good towards allowing people to choose their own destiny and to avoid the pitfalls of saying like, well, I'm black, so I have pressure to act like I'm in this community, right? Even if those things I know are self-destructive, it's still a value in my community because there is no other route or value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally see that. And I feel like yeah, the government can like try to make policies over time, but yeah, this like to make a cultural change, like as seen through history, like it's gradual. It can happen as long as like the effort's there. But I feel like are the is the effort being made right now to make those changes?
Well, by who?
By like everyone. Like I mean, I guess like it takes every on both sides, like the community themselves and the government, or to make these kinds of policies that work in favor for them.
Yeah, and that's really what no one wants to hear is that it requires buy-in on both sides.
Yeah.
Right? You can't just have like a white savior come in and say like here's what you're doing wrong, okay? Here
Mhm.
and then try to like tell them to do that's not going to work, right? But you have to have those kinds of inroads and buy-ins on both sides. And I think that's what um, right now we're really struggling with as a society because right conservatives feel like they're losing some part of America that they used to have, and uh, liberals are feeling that um, progress is not being made fast enough, right? Regardless of what it is, right? So it's not just enough to fight gerrymandering laws in whatever state you live in because it plays on identity politics and says like we know black people are going to vote Democrat, so we'll just draw the maps in a certain way that will force that, right? It's going to require you to actually fight that. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about or aren't willing to put in the effort to do, right? I think too often
Yeah.
they fall into this trap that we say like, well, we voted a black man into office, so racism should be gone, right? And it's not. And if they're honest with
It got
themselves, everyone
worse.
knew that it wasn't going to go away like that.
Mhm.
So it requires more work. It requires more buy-in. It requires you to be more critical of not only yourself but others. And nobody likes to hear that because they like to hear the simple solution, where you know what,
Mhm.
I'm just going to support the cops and I support the troops and the cops, and that's all that's required of me. And the problem's just going to go away if we give the police force more money. Or on the opposite side, they'll say, well, the problem's going to go away if we get rid of police departments, right?
That's a
They
whole
fall
nother
into
thing.
these absolutes, right? Where they're not
Mhm.
willing to get into the nitty gritty and address the more complicated parts of that issue. They'd rather just approach it and say, like, this is an absolute, right? It is a cultural problem that's not going to be solved by throwing money at it. Therefore, um, conservatives, Ben Shapiro types, should just criticize uh, attempts to do anything about it.
um what's it called? Honestly, the whole thing about police, like that's a tricky thing too, because like I see both sides to that too. So it's hard to like really have a good stance on it. Um, which yeah, it's just because like every day I feel like I'm probably more on the side where I think there needs to be some kind of police reform, but you know I still see on like I still yeah like I can you know like I still support police too. Like I feel like they're definitely very necessary, um, but yeah I don't know. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, so like when I see
Um,
videos of like the mass looting, so they'll go into like a shopping mall and there'll be like 12
mhm.
people go in and just grab things and run, right? Part of
Yeah.
me says like, well, the problem is that, this is deeper than just poverty, right? The
Hmm.
poverty didn't cause this by itself. This is lack of responsibility issue. This is a lack of ethics issue that's not being taught in the house, but at the same time, we don't want it to be taught in schools because then that would require us to put more money and resources into education. We don't want to do that
Hmm.
either. And so, you end up being like, we're not willing to do what it would take to actually solve this problem. So, what's a band aid solution that we can throw at it? Well, we tried
Yeah.
putting them all in jail. We tried the tough on crime solution. And what we ended up doing was just taking more fathers out of households. And then that just
Hmm.
perpetuates the problem. It doesn't solve the problem, right? And I think too often we say, like, well, if we just put all these people that commit crime, put them in jail, well, you still haven't solved the essential question of is prison to reform the criminal so that they can become a productive citizen when they get out? Or is it just to separate them from the rest of society for a period of time until we're forced to let them back out where they're likely to reoffend? And then we have a justification to put them in the prison longer, right? we haven't really
Yeah.
had the discussion, or we haven't been willing to make that decision and stick with it before we decide to have a tough on crime issue and throw them all in jail. And so you end up with a policy that doesn't solve either issue.
Yeah, I see every day like clips of like cops being extremely like 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 they're being extreme pretty much, and a lot of the cases it's towards the African American community, and yeah, I just think like seeing that, yeah, it makes my blood boil sometimes. I'm just like, damn, like there clearly needs to be some like reform. But at the same time, then I see like a clip of a cop like clearly, you know, like he's being threatened, he's doing what he can, right? And like the man is like clearly not listening. And like it's not like he like I don't know, it's just like I'm being general here. But like and say in this case like the cop had to um shoot them. And I'll be like, yeah, no, and then some people in the comments be like, yo, this is disgusting. I'll be like, why? He was clearly, you know, trying to protect his life. You know, like I think what he did there was normal. Like that's what he should have done. Right? And regardless of what he did was right or wrong, the you know like people from the African American community are gonna view that as like no, that's as bad, and
Yeah. They've picked their
um
tribe and they're not willing to see the gray area in between,
mhm,
or to be critical of it, right? So the trap on both sides is to say, well, any instance where a cop is putting the cuffs on somebody, that's police brutality. And on the flip side, it's,
mhm,
well, cops got to do what they got to do, right? So anything
mhm,
that the cop does is definitely going to be justified because you got to put these wild animals in a cell, right? And I think that, yeah, too often they fall into that trap where they're not willing to see the in between. They're not willing to see the nitty gritty. They just want to pick one side and go with it, right? So I saw a funny video today of this guy who is a spoof video. This guy saying like, "Well, I'm not sure which flag to put in my bio now. Do I put the Palestinian flag in my bio or do I put the Israeli flag in my bio? I don't know. Usually I just pick whatever the LGBTQ community goes with and sticks with that. But this time it seems more complicated and I don't know what to do."
I mean, it's. I feel like the Israeli and Palestine situation is just you can't really ever pick a side, right? That's like what I've heard. Um, like I don't know too much about it. Like I just know the basics about the whole thing. Um, but from what I hear, just like the history goes so deep that like to pick a side is tough. You know.
Yeah, no, it is really tough. And I actually worked on a research project at my university on uh, population dynamics in Mandate Palestine from the 1860s to the 1940s. And so my
Mm-hmm.
arm of that research project was specifically the city of Nablus in the West Bank. Um, and the project was like, you look at all the census records from the Ottoman Empire to the British census, and look at like their how many kids they have, what their occupation is, where they live, do they live in urban or rural places, and then you kind of trace that data through the years to see like, is the population becoming more rural or is it becoming more urbanized? Do you have growth of industry in some places and a diminishment of industry in some places? Um, and so it came with it a lot of research on the history of this, right? I took a couple of courses on Middle Eastern
Uh-huh.
history, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's really long, deep, and complicated. I had an in-depth conversation with someone from the Discord server. This was Nate
Oh, okay.
about this topic specifically, and just on Thursday we had this long, drawn-out conversation about the root morals of either side, and you know. I made the assertion that both sides are in a trap now because both sides are politically motivated to keep the conflict going in one way or the other. Because for their population, the conflict is no longer about some scrap of land that they can make a treaty over. It's personal, right? So it's not
Mm-hmm.
about the Golan Heights anymore, right? This goes beyond some settlement of
Okay.
land. This is
Okay.
now a multi-generational, personal, like feelings attached, loved ones lost conflict on both sides, and you can bet that neither side, neither side of the conflict is going to be willing to give up what it would take in order to actually achieve peace, because of the stakes involved to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then it's like, well, if we give up on Zionist settlements in the west of Palestine, then what was all the blood and suffering that my great auntie whatever went through? Or this is just another
Yeah.
way for the other side to oppress us on both sides, right? And neither side is going to be willing to give up their dreams of revenge or inflicted pain on the other um, in order to achieve an actual lasting peace. Because, for example, for the Palestinian side, if Israel just said, okay, you know what, we're going to get rid of this giant open air prison we call the Gaza Strip, we're going to get rid of all the walls, and you guys can go anywhere that you want, and you guys have freedom to leave, to engage in business, to have access to international banking, etc. Right? We'll treat you like any other country. Okay? What would immediately happen is a lot of terrorist attacks and ethnic killing against Israelis and vice versa, because there's no longer anything to stop the Israelis from doing the exact same thing to the Palestinians anymore, because the root motivations haven't changed in that case, in that hypothetical,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And you can bet that they're not going to vote for someone who toes the rope of peace in the elections. Like, so if Benjamin Netanyahu ran on a campaign or a campaign platform that said, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to make sure that we have lasting peace, and here's what I'm going to do it. We are going to make peace with the Palestinian Authority through levels of blah, 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 blah. They don't want to hear that. They want to hear someone who's going to increase the national defense through courting support from abroad. That's what they want to hear. And the same is true for the Palestinians. You want to know why Hamas is such a powerful political entity? Because unlike the Palestinian Authority, they say that they will actually do violent attacks against the other side. Not because they're just, so cool and everyone loves the look of their flag, right? They're politically powerful because they actually do what the population wants to happen. And you can't deny that. And so, that's why I think that there really is no winners in this. And in my opinion, the people who really look dumb on this topic are the people who say, who go all in on their support on one side or the other, unequivocally, right? So they say, like, I support Israel because, and then they put some stupid reason like, well, it's because they got attacked by terrorists. This attack that happened on Saturday. That's why I support Israel. And choose actively to either purposefully live in ignorance of the root reason why there's acts of terrorism and violence against Israel is so politically popular in Gaza, or you take the position of, you go all in on your support of Palestine. Say, like, yeah, it's because the Palestinians are being so oppressed by the Israelis, without taking the steps to say, well, what is the root cause of why the Israelis feel that they have to take these measures to prevent the Palestinians from leaving, right? What all of these complaints that the Palestinians have about the condition in which they live, it's the assumption that the Israelis are doing that to them just because they want to, just for the fun of it, right? I think that
Which is
if you
not
go
the case.
all in on both sides, I think those are the people who really look dumb, is the people who unequivocally support one side or the other. And unfortunately, I'm worried that the bulk of the United States is in that boat.
Yeah. No, I think like the people I see in my social media, like I see the majority of them supporting Palestine, right? And I see that their reason is primarily due to recency of what's happening, right? It's just like, oh yeah, they're getting bombed, they're getting kicked out of where they're living, which I think are valid points. Like why should some people care about what happened, years ago, hundreds of years ago? And I know some of some of it's actually pretty recent, but I think for some people it's like the Palestinians have been living like the Palestinians have been living there. Like I don't really know what's going on too much, but like from what I've seen, it's like, yeah, the Palestinians were living there for like a good bit, for their whole lives, and then they were recently kicked out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people took the side, were like, yeah, I don't care about what happened like 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago. Like these people have lived their whole lives there. They have sort of nothing to do with what happened, many years ago, and they're getting kicked out. And that's why I saw so many people, at least in the community in circle of people that I follow on my social media. That's why they're all on the side of Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And primarily due to the recency of like yes, the Palestinians are currently living there, right? And now they're getting kicked out, and now they're getting bombed, right? So fuck the Israelites. Like that's the general consensus that I'm seeing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I think that the actions that have been taken on both sides have really just perpetuated everyone's hatred, right? Because now You have people that say, yeah, screw the Palestinians, let's just carpet bomb them. Or you have the people who say, yeah, screw the Israelis, we got to do what we can to support violence against them. Right? And it doesn't solve the
Yeah.
problem. Right? That's why I think it's so stupid about the idea that the Israelis want revenge now, right? So everyone's talking about this possible ground offensive into Gaza. It doesn't really solve the problem, though. So even if they flatten and completely take over the Gaza Strip, kick all the Palestinians out, all those Palestinians are going to go to Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, right? And all of at the same time, all of those other countries are going to hate you more. And depending on the optics of how they invade Gaza, they might lose a lot of Western support as well. So there's a lot of talk about the United States will support Israel, right? Well, how many images of dead civilians have to reach the internet before voters start to change their heart, right? How many bodies are you willing to put up with before the public changes their tune? You already have
I
a
mean,
lot of
currently, it's
You already have a
yeah,
lot
it's
of
already.
conservatives saying, "Well, why are we spending all this money?" Right? We spend more money supporting Israel than we ever did supporting Ukraine, and it's
Yep,
not hard for
that's
me to
another
believe that the ire could be drawn towards our support for Israel as well, if the optics look bad. And so I think that's the question that Netanyahu and other Israeli officials have on their heads right now is, sure, we'd love to flatten Gaza, but at what cost to our support from the international community for a country who is so reliant on international aid as Israel is?
So I just don't understand why we bend our knees for them so much. Then
You want to know why? It's because of CPAC. So,
what's that?
so CPAC is an organization that is it's a political action committee that donates a ton of money from wealthy, um, primarily Jewish individuals and organizations to give to political candidates that support their cause. So, for example, like, and both parties do this, by the way. That's why nothing changes between administrations. They go to CPAC, they get their money in exchange for a promise to do their bidding when they get to office. And they're really smart because they'll give the money to both sides, both the Democrats and the Republicans. And so then it's like, well, now that it's not, my money anymore, if you'll give money to my reelection campaign, I'll make sure that we keep funneling money into Israel.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. So, I mean,
And
I've
that's
only
not to
heard
say
about
that there's
people
no
that.
other reason why. I
Mhm.
mean, it is a friendly country in a unfriendly neighborhood, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's one of America's rare strong allies in the Middle East, mostly because we bought it. Um,
Yeah.
so the Israelis are really hesitant to do anything to piss off the United States because you know you never slap sugar daddy.
Yeah.
So it's a good friend of the United States in a hostile part of the world where the United States really doesn't have that many allies, so to say. Maybe Kuwait, but even then, that's kind of up and down.
All right. Well, well, thank you. Cause yeah, this whole like Israel Palestine situation, like I've only done like my basic overview like Google searches on it because of whatever's been happening recently. Um, I remember like there was like it was like a huge thing like around a year ago too. Like I remember something happened a year ago, and I forget what it was exactly. But yeah, it became a huge debate then, and then people forget about it until something big happens again. You know, so.
Hmm. Now that
But
it's
yeah,
in the
it seems
headlines,
like
people are going to have strong opinions. I think it's going to be funny to see politicians that used to be really critical of the U.S. giving aid to Ukraine will suddenly
yeah,
be like all in on supporting Israel.
yeah. No, I already saw a meme on that on like Instagram where they're like this one. There were already were one politician who was like super against Ukraine is all for, um, yeah, aiding Israel. So I don't remember which politician that was because,
Yeah,
but
because
yeah,
there's never any corruption of or
yeah.
mismanagement of foreign aid in Israel ever.
Hmm. Never.
And they change their tune like that all the time. It's just hilarious to me. I mean, in Ukraine, there actually is cities that are getting flattened, you know. But in Israel,
Yeah.
you have one terrorist attack that's not even perpetuated by a real country, and it's
Hmm.
they change their tune and say, "Oh, we got to give the Israelis anything that they ask for." But I'm gonna tout my BS in front of the cameras about giving money to Ukraine. It's just hilarious to me how they turn tail. And this happens on both sides of the aisle too. By the way, it's what makes it so laughable. Um, yeah, I just it's a lot of BS. It's really sad to turn on C-SPAN and watch a bunch of adults behave like children.
Yeah, no, it sort of makes me like not hopeful at all for like this for like the future of, you know, our political system. But I don't know.
Well,
At the same time, yeah, you go.
I'll leave you with some good news because I'm gonna end this in a little bit. But
Yeah, I
I'll
need to
leave
go
you
soon.
with why I'm hopeful. Third parties and dissatisfaction with the two party system is at an all time high. There has never been a time in American history that this data has been recorded where particularly young people are dissatisfied with the two party system on either side than there is now. That's
Hmm.
why third parties are more popular now than ever, really. And it's why young people in particular are much more likely to be critical of both sides. So even in Vietnam, right, during the hippie movement, there's one side that said, yeah, I'm going to get our troops out of Vietnam, and one side that said, yeah, we're absolutely going to stay, right? It's because even during those times, right, one party would kind of absorb, the movement, and the other would be left in the dust. But that's not the case in this case. In this case, they've really shot themselves in the foot because young people, and when I say young people, I'm talking 30 and younger. So 30 and younger in this country are the most likely to be critical of their own party than any time in American history. And I think that's really saying something. And it means that in the future, there's going to be more and more um, tendency to see that in between complication, right? Much more
Yeah.
willing to say, I think that this problem is more complicated than the political pundits are making it seem. And I'm hopeful for that. I think that gives us a lot of hope for the future because it means that we've sort of successfully trained a generation to inoculate themselves against all of the things that seek to disenfranchise them, and that's why I'm hopeful for the future. But that's also why we have to capitalize on it, right? We have to be politically
Yeah.
involved and to organize movements and projects that will see these ideas and see the satisfaction to flourishing, rather than sit on our couch and, you know, pave paradise and turn it into a parking lot. So
Yeah. I guess like the only thing I have to say about that is just like, yeah, I'm not like I don't doubt that the young people of our generation are clearly like they see what's wrong with the political system. I guess it's just like the sheer number of the older generations, they outnumber us by a lot. So it's just like we'll like yes, I believe change will happen. I just think it's gonna take a while.
yeah, but it's like the Archie Bunker argument. Back in the day, if you heard of Archie Bunker, he was a character on a TV show, and he would always play the
Never heard.
character of like the old crusty guy who has politically incorrect
Uh
opinions.
huh.
we
Okay.
all we all have that one relative at family
Yeah.
get-togethers that makes things awkward. Um, those people are aging out, right? So like all of the what I call the worst offenders of uh, biased media coverage, right? The Tucker Carlsons, um,
Hmm.
the Bill O'Reilly of the world, the Rush Limbaughs of the world. They're not playing out of a retirement home anymore, and there's a lot of attempt to kind of take a more modern approach and carve out a younger audience, right? What the Ben Shapiro's of the world are doing, but it's not really working out because grandparents are having a tough time convincing their grandkids to be homophobic, and that plays out in the numbers. Um,
Hmm.
and so, in a way, if the Republican Party continues to double down on these culture wars that they're clearly going to lose just by the
Yeah.
numbers, they're doomed. And so you're going to see some kind of shift happen eventually. And a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
the older generation are
That
going to
gives me
feel
a lot of
betrayed.
hope. Yeah, that gives me a lot of hope then. But yeah, okay. Yeah, when you word it like that, which this is one thing I really liked about liked about you, because I saw a little bit of your first stream where you were talking to um those kids about like cats and dogs and whatever. And like even though those like subjects were like very rudimentary and basic, um, like you still know how to word things in a way where like, yeah, damn, you can explain it really well so I can understand it, and also you're very convincing too. So
Well, glad. So that kid actually he came into the server because he wanted to practice debate. He had his
yeah.
first tournament today, and tomorrow,
Mhm.
and he wanted to come in for some pointers. And on Thursday
Yeah,
night, we
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
talked together, and I
Saw
gave him a
that.
lot of like advice and stuff like that, and we practiced a little bit. And
Yeah,
he's a really great
yeah,
kid. He's really smart, and I'm really excited to hear how his tournament went today.
yeah,
Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Hopefully, I can talk to him again next week. But
yeah.
I gotta go. It's been 2 hours, over 2 hours now. But it's
Yeah,
been a real pleasure
Jesus.
to talk to you. And thank you very much
Yeah, no.
for joining me.
Of course, debate guy. It's been a pleasure. I feel like I've learned a lot today, so I've been enlightened.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to hear that. That's really the joy or the aim. It's not to. My goal is not to change people's minds, but to have them walk away from the discussion having learned something.
Hmm.
And that's really my goal. So it sounds like I've achieved it, and that really makes me feel good. So thank you very much for saying that.
Of course. All right. Well, yeah. I'll see you around then.
Yeah, see you around. Thank you very much, man.
Hmm.